The night before her birthday, Margaret sat by the window with a warm cup of tea. The old house was silent, the kind of silence that made every small sound louder, the ticking clock, the distant creak of the wooden floor, the sigh of the wind outside. She turned 60 the next day, but she didn't feel ready for that number. Age was something she accepted, but not without questions. She thought about the years behind her, the moments she had given to others, the dreams she had quietly let go of. Margaret was a woman who had lived her life for her son, Daniel. From the moment he was born, she had poured her heart into raising him, often working late shifts and skipping her own desires just to make sure he had everything he needed. There were nights she would come home exhausted but still sit by his bed listening to his stories about school. She remembered how he used to draw birthday cards with crayons, filled with crooked hearts and letters, always ending with, "I love you." Mom, those memories were treasures to her, more valuable than any gift money could buy. But time had changed things. Daniel had grown into a man with his own life, a busy job, and responsibilities that left him little space to visit. Margaret never complained. She knew he was building his future, and she wanted him to succeed. Still, sometimes she wondered if he remembered the woman who had stood by him through everything. Now, as the years stretched behind her and the house grew quieter, she longed for a little of that warmth again. She tried not to expect much from her birthday. Maybe a call, maybe a short visit if he had time. She had learned to keep her hopes small so they wouldn't break her heart when the day came and went without much notice. But deep down, a part of her still wished. She wished he would come, sit with her. It's going to remind her that she mattered not just as a mother, but as a person. That evening, Margaret looked out at the street. The neighborhood was calm, lit by soft street lamps. She could see families gathered at their dinner tables through the windows, laughter spilling out in faint echoes. She remembered when her home used to sound like that when Daniel would run around, chasing his friends in the yard, or when she would host small gatherings filled with chatter and warmth. Those days felt far away, almost like they belonged to another lifetime. She turned her gaze back inside, to the photographs that lined her mantel. One was of Daniel in his graduation gown, smiling proudly, his arm around her shoulders. Another showed them at the beach when he was young, both laughing as waves splashed at their feet. The images brought a smile to her lips, but also a pang in her chest. Photographs captured joy, but they also reminded her of how quickly time slipped away. Margaret took a deep breath, reminding herself not to be foolish. Birthdays were just days, after all. They came and went, marked more by candles and calendars than by anything else. Still, she couldn't deny the loneliness she felt. It wasn't about wanting a grand celebration. It was about wanting someone to notice, to say, "You still matter. You are still loved." As she sipped her tea, her mind wandered back to Daniel as a boy. She could almost hear his voice calling her from the other room, asking for help with homework or showing her a new drawing. The house had been alive then, every corner filled with the sound of life. Now the silence pressed heavily, and she wondered if this was what growing older meant. Watching the world move on while you stood still, the night grew colder, and Margaret pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. She lit a small candle on the table, the soft flame flickering gently. The glow reminded her of birthdays past, when the table would be covered with balloons, cakes, and laughter. She remembered one year when Daniel, only 10 at the time, had insisted on baking her a cake himself. The result had been lopsided and half-burned, but she had never eaten anything sweeter. Those were the memories she clung to when the silence felt too heavy. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the faint reflection of herself in the window. Her face carried the lines of years, lived fully the struggles, the joys, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices. Sometimes she wondered if Daniel ever realized how much she had given up for him. But then she shook her head. Love, true love, wasn't about keeping count. It was about giving without expecting anything in return. Still, as the clock in the hall chimed, Margaret felt a small ache in her heart. She whispered softly into the night, "Maybe tomorrow will surprise me." She didn't know what she meant by that. She wasn't asking for gifts or big gestures. She only hoped for something simple, something real. A sign that she was still seen, still remembered. still loved beyond duty and obligation. The tea had gone cold in her cup, but she didn't notice. Her thoughts drifted back and forth between memory and hope, between what was and what might still be. She thought about calling Daniel, but stopped herself. She didn't want to be a burden, didn't want to remind him of something he might already be planning. She wanted whatever came tomorrow to be his choice, not her request. The night stretched on. Margaret moved to her bedroom, slipping beneath the quilt that had kept her warm for decades. As she lay there, listening to the quiet hum of the night, her mind returned again and again to the same thought. 60 years. 60 years of living, giving, and waiting. She didn't feel old inside, but the number sounded heavy. And yet, even with all those years, she still hoped. Hope was something age could never take away. Her eyelids grew heavy. But just before she drifted off, Margaret pressed her hands together as if in prayer. "Please," she whispered to no one in particular, "let tomorrow be different." And with that small wish tucked in her heart, she finally closed her eyes. Unaware of what awaited her when morning came, the morning of Margaret's birthday began like any other. She woke early, the soft light of dawn slipping through the curtains, painting her room in gentle shades of gold. She lay in bed for a moment, staring at the ceiling, letting the reality of the day sink in. 60 years old. The number felt heavy. But her heart was lightened by a fragile hope she had carried with her into sleep. She moved slowly, her joints stiff from the chill in the air. In the kitchen, she boiled water for coffee, her favorite comfort on quiet mornings. She reached for her small notebook where she kept grocery lists and reminders. And in the corner, she scribbled "birthday today" as if she might forget otherwise. It made her chuckle, though the sound was soft and lonely in the empty house. Margaret tried to busy herself with small tasks, watering her plants, folding the laundry, dusting the shelves. She did not expect much, yet she couldn't help listening for a knock at the door or the ring of the phone. The silence, as usual, was steady and patient. She poured herself a second cup of coffee, telling herself not to be silly. Just as she was about to settle into her chair by the window, the doorbell rang. The sound startled her so much that she nearly spilled her drink. Her heart leaped. She hurried to the door, her hands trembling slightly, and when she opened it, there he was, Daniel. Her son stood on the porch with a shy smile and a small box wrapped neatly in his hands. He looked tired, perhaps from work, but his eyes softened when they met hers. For a moment, Margaret couldn't speak. She simply stood there, taking in the sight of him, feeling a rush of warmth she hadn't felt in so long. "Happy birthday." "Mom," Daniel said, his voice gentle. Margaret's throat tightened. She reached out, touched his arm, and whispered, "You came." Those two words carried all the meaning she couldn't put into longer sentences. Daniel stepped inside, his presence filling the quiet house with life again. He placed the little box on the table, but before she could reach for it, he shook his head. "Not yet. First, I just want to sit with you." They sat across from each other at the kitchen table. Margaret noticed the way he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the wood, as if he wanted to close the distance between them. For a while, they talked about simple things: his work, the weather, the old neighbors who had moved away. Yet, beneath the casual words, Margaret felt something unspoken hanging in the air. Daniel seemed quieter than usual, his gaze lingering on her, as though he was carrying a weight he hadn't yet shared. Margaret wanted to ask, but she didn't. Instead, she poured him coffee and set out a plate of cookies she had baked the night before, thinking she might eat them alone. Watching him take one and smile faintly made her chest swell with quiet joy. Finally, Daniel pushed the box across the table. "Open it now," he said. Margaret's fingers trembled as she pulled the ribbon loose and lifted the lid. Inside was not jewelry or anything costly. Instead, she found a small photo album, leather-bound, filled with pictures she had never seen before. Her breath caught as she turned the pages. There were photographs of Daniel growing up, but not just the usual school portraits or birthdays. These were moments she had missed, pictures friends had taken, pictures he had collected over the years. There he was, playing his first basketball game in high school. There he was, on his college campus, standing with friends, smiling wide. There were photos from his first apartment, from road trips, from quiet evenings with people she had never met. Each page was a piece of his life, a life she hadn't always been there to see. And with every photograph, she felt the tears welling up. Daniel reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "I wanted you to have these," he said softly. "You gave me everything growing up, Mom. I didn't always say thank you, and I know I've been distant. But I never forgot what you did for me. Every step I took, you were with me, even when you weren't there." Margaret could no longer hold back the tears. They spilled freely, sliding down her cheeks as she clutched the album to her chest. She had expected nothing that day, not even a visit. And yet here was a gift far greater than anything she could have imagined. Proof that she was still in his heart. Proof that her sacrifices had not been invisible for a moment. The kitchen was silent except for her quiet sobs and Daniel's steady voice. "I know I've missed dinners, birthdays, holidays, but I want to do better. I don't want you to feel alone anymore." Those words struck Margaret harder than the gift itself. She looked at him, really looked, and saw not just her son, but a man trying to bridge the gap between them. A man who understood her loneliness and wanted to change it. She reached out, cupping his face in her hands like she used to when he was a boy. "You've already given me the best birthday I could ask for," she whispered. Daniel smiled, though his eyes were glassy with his own unshed tears. He squeezed her hands gently. "It's only the beginning, Mom. I have something more to tell you later." Margaret blinked, surprised. "More?" He nodded, though he said nothing else. His silence was filled with promise, and her heart raced with curiosity. What could he mean? As the morning stretched into afternoon, Margaret felt something she hadn't in a long time: hope. Not the fragile kind she whispered into the night, but a hope rooted in something real. The weight of loneliness she had carried for years began to lift, replaced by the warmth of Daniel's presence and the mystery of what he might reveal next. When he finally stood to refill his coffee, he glanced at her with an expression that was almost hesitant, almost vulnerable. "Later tonight, after dinner," he said quietly, "there's something important I want to share. Something I should have told you a long time ago." Margaret's heart skipped. She wanted to press him for answers, but the look in his eyes told her she had to wait. And so, as she held the little album close, she realized this birthday was not just about a gift. It was the beginning of something deeper, something she had longed for without knowing. The day had only begun. But already Margaret knew her life was about to change. The afternoon moved quickly. But for Margaret, every minute felt like a heartbeat waiting to skip. Daniel stayed by her side the whole day, helping her with small things, fixing the squeaky cabinet door, replacing a light bulb, even tidying up the living room where she kept her photo frames. His presence turned the quiet house into a home again, and she found herself laughing more than she had in years. When evening arrived, Margaret decided to cook his favorite meal: roast chicken with garlic mashed potatoes and roasted carrots. It wasn't fancy, but it was the dish he always asked for as a boy, and she wanted the night to feel special. The kitchen filled with rich smells, and she noticed Daniel hovering around, offering to help. He set the table, laid out the good plates she rarely used, and even opened the curtains so the fading sunset bathed the room in orange light. By the time they sat down to eat, Margaret felt an energy she hadn't felt in years. She was nervous, though she tried to hide it. Her son had promised to tell her something after dinner, and that thought lingered with every bite she took. They ate slowly, enjoying the food, sharing stories from the past. Daniel spoke about work, but not in the usual rushed way. He spoke about his late nights, his struggles with balance, and how he realized he had let his job take priority over family. Margaret listened carefully, nodding, though her heart ached at how long it had taken him to see. Finally, the plates were empty. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on her. He hesitated, as though gathering strength. "Mom," he began, his voice quiet but steady, "there's something I've been carrying for a long time. Tonight feels like the right time to tell you." Margaret's breath caught. She set her fork down, folding her hands tightly in her lap. "Go on," she whispered. Daniel took a deep breath. "Do you remember when I left for college? how I didn't call as often as I should have, how I missed your birthdays, Christmas, and even Dad's anniversary one year. Margaret nodded slowly. The memories stung, but she didn't interrupt. I wasn't just busy, Daniel said. I was lost. I was chasing success because I thought it would make me worthy. I wanted to prove to myself and maybe to Dad's memory that I could be strong. But in the process, I pushed you away. I told myself I'd make it up to you later. I thought there would always be more time. His words struck deep. Margaret blinked back tears, her chest heavy with both sorrow and love. Daniel, she whispered, but he raised his hand gently. Let me finish. A few months ago, something happened. A close friend of mine, he lost his mother. She passed suddenly, and I saw his pain, Mom. I saw how broken he was because he never got to say what he wanted to her. That day, I realized, what if I lost you before I had the chance to tell you how much you mean to me? What if I kept waiting until it was too late? Margaret's lips trembled. Her hands tightened together as she listened, each word sinking like rain into dry soil. Daniel leaned forward now, his voice raw, his eyes shining. I know I can't bring back the years I was absent. I can't erase the birthdays you spent alone, the holidays without me. But I want to start over. I want you to know that you are the reason I've made it this far. You are my strength, Mom, and I don't ever want you to feel forgotten again. The silence that followed was thick with emotion. Margaret could hear her own heartbeat, fast and uneven. She looked at her son, grown and weathered by life, yet speaking with the honesty of the boy she had raised. Her tears fell freely now, rolling down her cheeks as she reached across the table. Daniel met her halfway, their hands clasping tightly. You've always been enough for me, she whispered. Always. I never needed success or gifts. I only ever wanted you to remember me, to share your life with me. Daniel's lips trembled into a smile. Then let me do that now. Let me be here, really here, for you. The moment was raw, unguarded, and beautiful. For the first time in years. Margaret felt the distance between them close completely. Then Daniel added something that made her heart race even faster. Mom, there's one more part to my gift. And this one. Well, it's not just for tonight. It's for the future. Margaret wiped her tears, confused but hopeful. What do you mean? Daniel stood, walked to his coat draped on the chair, and pulled out an envelope. He handed it to her gently. Inside, Margaret found 2 plane tickets, one with her name, one with his. The destination, Paris. Her eyes widened. Daniel. He smiled softly. You've always dreamed of going, haven't you? I remember you talking about it when I was a kid. How you wanted to see the Eiffel Tower and walk along the Seine. I saved up, Mom. I want to take you. Just us, together. A new memory we can share, not one you'll look back on alone. Margaret's hand shook as she held the tickets. Paris had always been her dream, one she thought too far away, too impossible, especially now at her age. She had never imagined her son would remember such a small detail from long ago, much less make it real. Her voice broke as she said, Daniel, this is too much. No, he interrupted softly. It's not enough, but it's a start. Margaret couldn't speak anymore. She rose from her chair and wrapped her arms around him, clinging tightly as though afraid he might vanish. For a long time, neither of them let go. That night, as they cleared the table and sat together in the living room, the album rested on the coffee table beside the tickets. Margaret felt her heart lighter than it had been in years. She had her son back, not just in presence, but in spirit. And now she had something to look forward to, a journey, a promise, and perhaps the beginning of healing what had once felt broken. But as the clock ticked toward midnight, and Daniel looked at her with quiet intensity, she sensed there was still more unsaid. Something lingered in his eyes, something even deeper than confessions or promises. Margaret braced herself, knowing part of his truth was still waiting to be revealed. The house was quiet after dinner. The dishes were washed, the table cleared. And the gift Daniel had given, the photo album and the plane. Tickets rested on the coffee table like symbols of a new beginning. Margaret sat beside her son on the couch, the glow of the lamp casting a warm circle of light around them. Yet even in that comfort, she felt the weight of something unsaid. Daniel leaned back, his hands clasped together, staring at the album as though gathering courage. Margaret noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way he avoided her eyes. "There's still something else, isn't there?" she asked gently. He glanced at her, a small, almost nervous smile crossing his face. "You always could read me too well, Mom." Margaret placed a hand over his, steady and warm. "Then don't hold back. Say what you need to say." For a moment, Daniel was silent, as though he feared his own words. Then, in a voice soft but certain, he said, "I've decided to move back." Margaret blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. "Move back? You mean here?" Daniel nodded. "Yes, to this town. Closer to you. I've already spoken to my company. They offered me a transfer, one that would allow me to work fewer hours and still stay involved. It's not as glamorous as my current position, but it means I can finally have a life, not just a career. And it means I can be here for you." Margaret's heart leaped, then trembled. For years, she had trained herself not to hope for too much. She accepted his busy life, the silence of the house, the empty holidays. Now, hearing his words, she felt both joy and disbelief. "Daniel, are you sure?" she whispered. "You've worked so hard to get where you are. I don't want you to give that up because of me." He shook his head firmly. "It's not giving up. It's choosing differently. I've realized that success means nothing if I'm alone at the top. What's the point of achievement if the people I love most aren't by my side to share it with me? I don't want to miss any more moments with you. I don't want to live with regret." Margaret's eyes welled with tears again. She squeezed his hand, overwhelmed by the depth of his words. "You don't know how much this means to me," she said, her voice breaking. Daniel smiled faintly. "I think I do. I see it now, the way your face lights up just having me here today. And I can't imagine going back to the way things were. I don't want our bond to be something we talk about in the past tense. I want to live it now every day." Margaret leaned back, her heart racing. For years she had carried quiet loneliness, smiling through birthdays spent alone, telling herself it was enough that her son was out there chasing dreams. But now she realized how much she had longed for his presence, his laughter in the house, the little things that made life whole. The clock struck midnight, its chime echoing softly through the living room. The sound made the moment feel even more significant, like the marking of a new beginning. Daniel turned toward her, his expression earnest. "Happy birthday again, Mom," he said quietly. "But this time, it's not just a day. It's a promise. From now on, I won't let distance or excuses steal our time. I'll be here with you." Margaret couldn't hold back anymore. She pulled him into a tight embrace, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. Daniel held her just as firmly, the kind of hug that spoke of years lost and years still to come. They stayed like that for a long time. Mother and son, the silence filled not with absence, but with connection. When they finally pulled apart, Margaret wiped her face and gave a shaky laugh. "You've managed to give me the greatest gift I could ever imagine. Not the album, not even Paris, though. That's incredible. But this, your presence, your choice to come home." Daniel's eyes softened. "It's what you deserve. And truthfully, it's what I need, too. I don't want to live with the fear of losing the most important person in my life without saying everything that matters. I want you to see me not just as your son who visits once in a while, but as someone who is truly here for you." Margaret nodded, her heart overflowing. "Then let's start fresh. A new chapter." As the night grew deeper, they sat together, flipping through the photo album again. This time the pictures didn't feel like reminders of what was lost, but seeds of what could grow again. They laughed over old memories, Daniel's crooked smile in school photos, his messy birthday cakes, the way his father used to make him wear sweaters too big for him in the winter at one point. Daniel leaned back and said, "When we go to Paris, I want to take new photos with you. Ones will add to this album so one day we can look back and remember not just the past, but the future we built together." Margaret smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. I'd like that more than anything." The house, once quiet and lonely, now felt alive with possibility. For Margaret, the birthday that had begun like so many others with quiet expectation and hidden sorrow had turned into the most unforgettable night of her life. Her son's gift wasn't the tickets or even the album. It was something much greater. His return, his love. His decision to truly be part of her world again as she blew out this single candle on the small cake they had almost forgotten in the kitchen. Margaret made a silent wish, but in her heart she knew it had already come true. That night, as she went to bed, the tickets tucked safely in her drawer and the album resting on her nightstand, she felt lighter than she had in decades. For the first time in years, she didn't worry about the silence of tomorrow. She knew it would be filled with laughter, with plans. With her son by her side, and as she drifted into sleep, Margaret realized that sometimes the most precious gifts are not wrapped in paper or tied with bows. Sometimes they are spoken in promises, carried in actions, and felt in the simple, irreplaceable presence of someone you love.